My name is Cora Linden. I am 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been guided by a quiet reverence for the small, intricate things. I grew up in a small house with a sprawling garden in the misty outskirts of Portland, Oregon. My most vivid childhood memories are not of grand events, but of the quiet hours spent in my grandfather's workshop. He was a watchmaker, a man who saw the universe in the delicate dance of gears and springs. He would let me sit on a tall stool, my chin barely clearing the worn oak of his workbench, and watch as he coaxed life back into timepieces that had long fallen silent. His tools were extensions of his fingers, moving with a grace that was a form of prayer. "Look here, Cora," he'd murmur, his breath smelling of chamomile tea. "Every piece has a purpose. Every gear must turn in harmony with the others. If one is out of place, even by a hair's breadth, the whole system falters. It doesn't stop with a bang, but with a slow, sad stillness." That lesson settled deep within me. I learned to find comfort in order, in the elegant logic of numbers and systems. It led me to a degree in finance and a master's in data analytics. I wasn't driven by a desire for wealth or power, but by a profound satisfaction in seeing complex systems function with integrity and grace. My world was one of balanced ledgers and color-coded spreadsheets, a professional reflection of my grandfather's tidy workshop. My personal life mirrored this. My small apartment overlooking the Willamette River was a sanctuary of calm, my books arranged by genre, my spices alphabetized, my heart content in its quiet rhythm. This love for harmonious systems is what drew me to Ethelred Development 5 years ago. They were a rising star in Portland's property development scene, renowned for their stunning, eco-conscious designs that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. Their headquarters, a beautiful building of reclaimed timber and living walls in the Pearl District, felt less like an office and more like a testament to their mission, crafting communities, building tomorrow. I believed in it. I saw my work as a small but vital gear in a beautiful machine, ensuring its smooth and honest operation. I was proud to be a part of it. For the first 3 years, it was everything I had hoped for. My work was valued, my analyses were praised for their clarity, and I felt a sense of belonging. The harmony was perfect. Then, 2 years ago, the mechanism began to falter. It began with the arrival of Julian Croft. "Sign this now, or I'll make sure you never work in this city again." The words, spoken in a low, almost regretful tone, were more chilling than a shout. They didn't hang in the air, they seeped into the sterile quiet of the conference room, chilling the polished glass of the table between us. Julian Croft, my director, slid the resignation letter toward me. His hands were manicured, his signet ring catching the flat, gray light. He wasn't a man of overt aggression. His power was in the subtle pressure, the implied threat veiled in a mask of concerned disappointment. "I need this by the end of the day, Cora," he said, his voice a soft hum, a stark contrast to the coiling tension in my chest. The walls of the room, usually a calming shade of riverstone gray, felt like they were pressing in on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. "Your work just hasn't been aligning with the team's goals lately. I think we both know a fresh start would be for the best." A fresh start. The phrase was a polished stone, smooth and cold. My mind flashed through the last 2 years, the 70-hour weeks I'd poured into projects he later presented as his own, the family holidays I'd missed to meet deadlines he'd arbitrarily moved up, the innovative cost-saving models I'd developed, only to have my name quietly erased from the final proposals. And now this. This ambush, staged just a week after I had gently, privately, questioned a series of troubling payments from the company's land stewardship fund. I reached for the sleek, heavy pen on the table. My hand was surprisingly steady, but my vision narrowed to a single point. The text of the letter swam before my eyes, a blur of corporate jargon, but one phrase stood out, stark and absolute: voluntary resignation. I looked up from the page, past Julian's mask of feigned sympathy to his eyes, which held a glint of cold victory. I saw the discreet presence of a security guard, a man named Michael I often chatted with by the elevators, now standing uncomfortably outside the glass door. And in that moment, a quiet clarity settled over me, like the calm after a storm. Julian believed he had won. He had built his case, isolated me, and now presented me with an exit designed to silence me forever. What he didn't understand was that my grandfather had taught me more than just a love for order. He had taught me that when a system is compromised, you don't smash it. You find the single, misaligned gear and, with patience and precision, you set it right. For months, I had been preparing for this quiet, sad stillness. I had documented every dismissive comment, every stolen idea, every questionable directive. I had spent my evenings not with friends, but with the dense, dry language of Oregon employment law, my lamplight a small beacon against the rainy Portland nights. I signed the letter without a word of protest. But as Julian turned to take a self-important call, his back to me, I picked up the pen again. With a hand that did not tremble, I made a small, neat alteration to the document. He had miscalculated, not the strength of my anger, but the quiet weight of my resolve. He had failed to see the smallest, most important gear of all, my own self-worth. This isn't a story about revenge. Revenge is a fire that consumes everything, leaving only ash. This is a story about restoration. It's about learning to respect the quiet voice inside you that whispers when something is wrong, and finding the courage to honor that voice, even when it means standing alone in the silence. It's about reclaiming your own harmony in a world that often profits from your discord. Julian Croft had arrived at Ethelred with a reputation that preceded him, a golden boy from a competitor in Seattle, lauded for his aggressive growth strategies and magnetic charisma. He moved through our open-plan office like a visiting dignitary, all warm handshakes and disarming smiles. He remembered everyone's name, asked about their children, and had a way of making you feel like your contribution was the most important in the company. The leadership, including our CEO, the elegant and somewhat distant Ms. Isabel Sterling, was captivated. He was the future. The problems began like a subtle change in the weather, a coolness in the air you can't quite place. First, it was small things. I'd be left off an email chain for a project I'd initiated. In team meetings, he would listen intently to my male colleagues, but when I spoke, his eyes would drift to his phone, or he'd interrupt with, "Let's circle back to that, Cora," and never would. My meticulously researched reports, once lauded for their detail, were now returned with vague notes like, "Needs more strategic focus," or "Let's simplify the narrative." I confided in my closest colleague, Leo, a kind, perpetually flustered man who sat across from me. "I think you're reading too much into it," he'd said, running a hand through his hair. His wife had just had their first baby, and his focus was understandably elsewhere. Julian's just intense. He has high standards for everyone. But he didn't. I started to notice the patterns. He praised Leo for a market analysis I had spent a weekend perfecting. He took another female colleague, Anya from the legal department, off a major contract negotiation, telling her it required a more aggressive touch. He scheduled optional, team-building events at a sports bar I'd told him I was uncomfortable in. Each was a small thing, a paper cut, but they accumulated, leaving me feeling diminished and perpetually off balance. So, I started a new spreadsheet. It wasn't color-coded for projects, it was for my own peace of mind. In it, I recorded dates, times, specific phrases, and witnesses. It felt strange, almost paranoid, but it was the only way I knew to bring order to the chaos I was feeling. It wasn't about building a case against him. At the time, it was about proving to myself that I wasn't imagining it. Despite the creeping chill, my work remained my sanctuary. I poured myself into it, finding solace in the numbers. I developed a new analytics tool that identified undervalued commercial properties, a system that promised to save the company millions. I worked late, fueled by coffee and a stubborn refusal to be rendered invisible. My department's efficiency soared. I thought that by being undeniably valuable, I could make myself immune. Then I found the first broken gear. It was buried deep in the quarterly reports, an anomaly in the Land Stewardship Fund. This fund was Ethelred's crown jewel, a pool of money set aside to purchase and protect green spaces, a tangible symbol of their commitment to the environment. But I noticed a series of payments, $50, 000 here, $75,000 there, to a handful of newly formed LLCs with opaque ownership. The authorization codes were missing, the transaction notes vague. It was a subtle discord, a note played slightly out of tune that most would miss. But my grandfather had trained my ear for just this kind of dissonance. I spent a week cross-referencing past reports, and the pattern became clear. The irregular payments had started shortly after Julian's arrival and had been increasing in frequency and amount. They followed a disturbing rhythm. A payment would be made, and a few months later, a parcel of land, often ecologically sensitive wetland or a small, protected urban forest, would be rezoned for development and acquired by Ethelred at a surprisingly low price. I gathered my findings, my hands trembling slightly as I printed the spreadsheets. I requested a one-on-one meeting with Julian, determined to approach it as a collaborator, a fellow guardian of the company's integrity. I laid the printouts on his polished desk. "Julian, I found some inconsistencies in the stewardship fund transfers," I began, my voice even. "It looks like several payments are missing the proper director-level authorizations. I thought you'd want to see it." He didn't even glance at the papers. He leaned back in his expensive chair, steepling his fingers, and gave me a look of profound disappointment. "Cora," he said, his voice soft as felt, "I appreciate your diligence, I truly do. But this is a classic case of getting lost in the weeds. Accounting has oversight on this. You're stepping outside your lane." "But the protocol is clear," I insisted gently. "Transfers of this size require dual signatures. These only have one, and sometimes none at all." His expression hardened almost imperceptibly, the warmth receding like a tide. "Drop it," he said. The words were quiet, but they landed like a physical blow. "This is not your concern. Focus on the work that is." I walked back to my desk, my heart a cold, tight knot in my chest. He hadn't been dismissive, he had been warning me. That night, I went home and created a new, encrypted folder on my personal hard drive. My quiet, methodical documentation was no longer for my own validation. It was for my protection. The atmosphere shifted from chilly to Arctic. My performance review, historically stellar, was suddenly filled with phrases like struggles with collaborative feedback and needs to better align with management vision. My projects were reassigned. My emails to other department heads began to go unanswered. He was isolating me, cutting me off from the rest of the system. One afternoon, I was informed my desk was being moved to the archive annex, a small, windowless office in the basement, ostensibly to give me a quiet space to focus on data entry. During a rare after-work coffee with Anya from legal, she fixed me with a serious look over the rim of her mug. "He's managing you out, Cora," she said, her voice low. "I've seen him do it before. Be careful. Write everything down." "I am," I whispered, grateful for the affirmation. That night, I didn't just review my notes. I called a number I'd found on the Oregon State Bar website. The next evening, I found myself in a quiet, book-lined office, speaking to a woman named Evelyn Reed. She was in her late 60s, with kind eyes behind sharp, rectangular glasses and a calmness that immediately soothed my frayed nerves. She listened to my story without interruption, her hands resting on a worn leather portfolio, occasionally nodding. When I finished, I handed her a slim binder containing my meticulously organized documentation. She reviewed it for a long time, the only sound in the room the soft rustle of paper. Finally, she looked up. "This is a textbook case of creating a hostile work environment, Cora," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "And your documentation is immaculate. It tells a very clear story." "So, what do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Here is the difficult truth," she said, leaning forward. "These cases are draining. They will try to exhaust you, to discredit you. Even if you win, it can leave scars." She paused, her gaze steady. "So, the first question is not what we can win, but what you need to be whole again. He is trying to force you to resign. He wants me to just disappear." "Exactly," she said, tapping the binder. "So we don't let him. They are counting on you to be quiet and broken. Our job is to be prepared and clear. They've created the situation. We simply ensure the truth of it is documented." Her words were a lifeline. I wasn't a victim being pushed out. I was a careful archivist of the truth, preparing for a moment I hoped would never come. It came a week later. The final catalyst was a presentation to the board. Miss Sterling herself had praised my property analysis tool and asked me to present its findings. It was a moment of bright, clear validation. I saw Julian's smile tighten at the edges as she squeezed my shoulder. The next day, my access to the relevant databases was revoked for a system update. The day after that, an all-staff email announced that Julian would be presenting the analysis, citing his holistic understanding of the strategic landscape. When I calmly asked him for an explanation, he called me into his office, his face a mask of weary patience. "Your attitude is becoming an issue," he said, closing the door. "This is precisely the kind of insubordination my review mentioned." That's when I knew the final move was coming. The next morning, the mandatory meeting appeared on my calendar. Conference room 3. No agenda. Just Julian. As I walked down the hall, my heart beating a slow, heavy drum against my ribs, Anya passed me. She didn't stop, but her eyes met mine and she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was all the confirmation I needed. My phone was already recording in my bag, nestled next to the copies of my evidence and a printout of Ethelred's standard resignation form, which I had studied until I knew every clause by heart. And so I found myself at the glass table, the ultimatum hanging in the air. When Julian turned to take his call, the moment of clarity was absolute. I uncapped the pen. The line I drew through voluntary resignation was firm and straight. Above it, in my neatest script, I wrote, "Resignation under duress." I added the date and time in the margin. It was a small act, a quiet correction, but it felt like I was realigning the entire world. When he returned, he snatched the paper, his eyes scanning only for my signature at the bottom. The triumphant smile he gave me was one of pure satisfaction. "Clear out your desk by 5, he said. "Michael will escort you." "I understand," I said, meeting his gaze. "Just to be clear for my records, you requested this meeting to terminate my employment, correct?" A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "It's a resignation, Cora, as the letter you just signed documents." "Thank you for that clarification," I said softly and walked out the door, my mind ringing with a terrifying, exhilarating silence. In the cool, quiet of the women's restroom, I leaned against the marble counter, taking deep breaths until the trembling in my hands subsided. Then I called Evelyn Reed. "It happened," I said. "And you made the amendment?" Her calm voice came through the line. "Yes." He didn't notice. "Excellent," she said, a new energy in her tone. "Send me the photo. I'll draft the formal letter tonight." "You did wonderfully, Cora. Now go home and rest. The hard part is over." By 3 o'clock, my life at Ethelred was packed into a single cardboard box. Michael, the security guard, stood by, his expression one of genuine discomfort. "I'm really sorry about this, Ms. Linden," he said quietly, taking the box from me. "You're one of the good ones. Never made sense." "Thank you, Michael," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." Before I left, I made 2 stops. The first was at Human Resources. I handed the director, a woman I barely knew, a sealed envelope. "This is a formal complaint," I said, my voice steady. "It details a hostile work environment and constructive dismissal. It includes a copy of the resignation letter Mr. Croft coerced me into signing today, which I amended to reflect the true nature of the termination." Her professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening. "My attorney, Evelyn Reed, will be in contact in the morning," I added, then turned and walked away. My last stop was Leo's desk. He looked up, his face a mixture of shock and pity. "They're letting you go?" "It wasn't my choice," I said gently. I leaned in, keeping my voice low. "Leo, before I go, do me a favor. Look in the archives for the Land Stewardship Fund. Cross-reference the payment dates with the property acquisition timelines from the last 2 years. Just look at it." His brow furrowed in confusion. "Cora, what are you talking about?" "Just look," I repeated, squeezing his shoulder. "And be careful." As Michael walked me through the gleaming lobby, he paused at the revolving doors. "You know," he said, "I've been here a long time. The ones who get pushed out and go quietly, they carry it with them. But the ones who stand up for themselves, even when their voice is shaking, they walk out a little taller. He handed me my box. "You're walking out taller, Ms. Linden." That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat on my small balcony, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the rain fall on the river. The city lights blurred into soft watercolor strokes. The air, washed clean by the rain, felt lighter, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt I could breathe all the way to the bottom of my lungs. The tightness in my chest, a companion so constant I had mistaken it for a part of myself, was gone. There was a vast, terrifying uncertainty ahead, but in its place was a quiet, profound peace. I had not been broken. I had held my ground. The next morning, my phone rang at 8:15. It was an unknown number. Cora Linden. "Ms. Linden, this is Isabel Sterling." The CEO's voice was crisp and devoid of its usual warmth. "I have your letter and a draft complaint from your attorney. I think it's imperative we meet. Can you be here at 10? "I can," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "My attorney will be with me." There was a brief pause. "Of course. My general counsel will be present as well." 10th floor. I immediately called Evelyn, who met me at a cozy coffee shop down the street from the Ethelred building. The air was rich with the scent of dark roast and pastries. She was already there, a folder laid out next to her tea. "They're taking this very seriously," she said. That call came from Ms. Sterling herself, not HR or legal. "That's significant. She's trying to get ahead of it. What do we do?" "We listen," she said, her calm a steadying anchor. "We let them talk. We already know the truth. We need to see how much of it they are willing to acknowledge. Our position is clear and non-negotiable. This was not a simple HR issue. It was a systemic failure of oversight that enabled both workplace abuse and potential financial misconduct." At 9:57, we walked back into the lobby I had exited just yesterday. Michael was at the security desk. He saw me, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He simply nodded as I signed the visitor log. The 10th floor, the executive floor, was a world of hushed carpets and expensive art. The tension was palpable. We were shown into a large, intimidating boardroom. Miss Sterling sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by her general counsel. Julian was notably absent. "Miss Linden, Ms. Reed," she began, gesturing to the chairs opposite her. "Thank you for coming. I have reviewed your complaint. The allegations you make are deeply troubling." "They are documented facts, Miss Sterling," Evelyn corrected gently. Miss Sterling did not flinch. "Indeed. The documentation is extensive. I want to be clear. We at Ethelred do not tolerate the kind of behavior you have described." "And yet it was tolerated for 2 years," Evelyn countered, her voice still soft. "My client's experience suggests a significant gap between policy and practice. Furthermore, we have serious concerns about the financial irregularities Ms. Linden uncovered, which seem to be the catalyst for her forced resignation." The general counsel started to speak about internal audit procedures, but Ms. Sterling raised a hand, silencing him. She looked directly at me, her gaze piercing. For the first time, I felt she was truly seeing me, not as a subordinate, but as a person. "What is it you are seeking, Ms. Linden?" she asked. I took a breath, finding my voice. "I'm seeking accountability," I said. "And I want to ensure that no one else has to go through what I did. I believed in this company. I want the company to be what it claims to be." Evelyn then laid out our terms, a comprehensive, third-party investigation into both the hostile work environment and the financial activities of the Land Stewardship Fund, a complete overhaul of the HR reporting system to protect whistleblowers, and my full reinstatement. "Reinstatement?" The general counsel scoffed. "After these accusations?" "My client was an exemplary employee who was forced out for uncovering wrongdoing," Evelyn stated flatly. "Restoring her position is the first step toward correcting that." The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, an agreement was reached. I was to be immediately reinstated, placed on paid leave while an independent firm conducted a full investigation. Julian was placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. As we were leaving, Miss Sterling asked to speak with me alone. Evelyn gave me a questioning look, and I nodded. When the door closed, Miss Sterling's formal demeanor softened. "I am sorry," she said, her voice quiet. "I pride myself on being connected to this company, but I allowed myself to be blinded by his charisma and impressive numbers. I failed you. I failed my own principles." "Power can create blind spots," I offered. "It shouldn't," she countered, shaking her head. "Those financial records you flagged, how deep do you think it goes?" "Deep enough to suggest a deliberate, systematic effort to defraud the company and the communities we serve," I said honestly. A look of hard resolution settled on her face. "I see. Thank you, Cora. That is what I needed to know." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The investigative firm descended on the office, and the atmosphere was thick with tension and whispered conversations. I spent days with the investigators, walking them through my spreadsheets, my notes, my timeline. The story they told was undeniable. Slowly, others began to come forward. Anya provided a formal statement. 2 other women from the marketing department shared their own stories of Julian's manipulation. Leo, looking pale and shaken, came to the investigators with his own analysis of the land deals, confirming everything I had suspected. He later found me in the small park where I ate my lunch. "I looked, Cora," he said, his eyes filled with regret. "It was all there. I just didn't want to see it. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you." "You listened when it mattered, Leo," I said, offering him a small smile. "The truth needs witnesses." The investigation uncovered a sordid scheme. Julian had been using shell companies, controlled by an old associate, to buy up protected lands. He would then use his influence within the city planning office to have them rezoned, allowing Ethelred to acquire them at a fraction of their new value. The stewardship fund was his personal slush fund to facilitate the scheme, and he and his associate were splitting the profits. The total was estimated at over $2 million. 2 months after that fateful day in the conference room, Miss Sterling called an all-company meeting. She stood before us, not as a polished CEO, but as a leader humbled. She announced that the company had turned all findings over to the authorities, that Julian Croft had been terminated, and that Ethelred was taking full legal action against him. "This has been a painful and humbling chapter," she said, her voice resonating with sincerity. "We failed in our oversight and in our duty of care to our employees. It took the courage of one person, who refused to be silenced, to force us to look at the truth of who we had become." Her eyes found mine in the crowd. "We are indebted to her, and we will spend every day from now on earning back the trust we broke." In the wake of the upheaval, Ms. Sterling offered me a new position, head of ethical practices and oversight, a role created specifically for me, reporting directly to her. My first task was to work with the investigators and HR to redesign the company's accountability structures from the ground up. I saw Julian one last time months later on the courthouse steps, his picture in the paper. He looked smaller, diminished, the charismatic charm stripped away, leaving only a hollow-eyed man facing the consequences of his choices. I felt no triumph, only a quiet, deep-seated sadness for the harmony he had so willfully destroyed. My life is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's not the quiet of avoidance, but the quiet of confidence. I still find peace in the order of my spreadsheets, but I've also learned to embrace the messiness of human connection. I have coffee with Leo and Anya regularly. I am building something new at Ethelred, not with timber and glass, but with transparency and trust. Some evenings, I take out my grandfather's old loop and a box of spare watch parts he left me. I don't try to assemble them. I just hold the tiny, perfect gears in my palm, feeling their weight and their potential. He taught me that every piece has a purpose. What I learned on my own is that the most vital component of any system isn't a gear or a spring. It's integrity. It's the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth, a mechanism that, once you learn how to care for it, can never truly be broken. And with it, you can slowly, patiently, restore a harmony you thought was lost forever.